I'm Peter Gray, principal of Millennium Charter High School. People and Places is a production of the Media Center for Art, Education, and Technology at the Monterey County Office of Education and the students of Millennium Charter High School. I'd like to thank our sponsors, the Arts Council for Monterey County and the Pebble Beach Foundation, for their generous support of this program. And now, Episode 2 of People and Places, Old Man Rivers.
I remember my childhood names for grasses and secret flowers. I remember where a toad may live and what time the birds awaken in the summer, and what the trees and seasons smelled like, how people looked and walked and smelled even. From both sides of the valley, little streams slipped out of the hill canyons and fell into the bed of the Salinas River. In the winter of wet years, the streams ran full freshet. They then swelled the river until sometimes it raged and boiled, bank full, and then it was a destroyer. The river tore edges from the farmlands and washed whole acres down. It toppled barns and houses into itself to go floating and bobbing away. It trapped cows and pigs and sheep and drowned them in its muddy brown water and carried them to the sea. Then, when the late spring came, the river drew in from its edges and the sandbanks appeared. And in the summer, the river didn't run at all above ground. Some pools would be left in the deep swirl places under a high bank. The tules and grasses grew back, and the willows straightened up with the flood debris in their upper branches. The Salinas was only a part-time river. The summer sun drove it underground. It was not a fine river at all, but it was the only one we had. And so we boasted about how dangerous it was in the wet winter, and how dry it was in the dry summer. You can boast about anything if it's all you have. Maybe the less you have, the more you are required to boast.
For those who have deep memories of these rivers, like Steinbeck, know that water is both compelling and beautiful. People are drawn to rivers, streams, lakes, ponds, and bays. It is a calming experience and brings serenity to many. But it is also necessary for life, and it is home to many creatures, great and small. And because the earth does not make new water, we have a duty to protect the water that we have. When you turn on the faucet, you are seeing water that's been around and around the water cycle since the earth began. And what would we do without it? By order of the State Water Control Board, those on the peninsula will have a severe water shortage of about 40,000 homes with no water at the beginning of 2017, unless the state extends the deadline to stop overpumping the Carmel River. That's a loss of 2/3 of the water currently being used. None of the possible solutions out there will be completed soon enough to make up for that loss.
Here we are at the Carmel River, and this habitat is very important for not only aquatic species and terrestrial species like frogs, turtles, and all the fish and tadpoles that develop within the river and outside of the river.
Where do you think your water comes from? Do you think it just magically appears in your water hose? No, it comes from the Carmel Valley River.
Over time, with the overpumping, drought, pollutants in the groundwater, disruptions in habitats, diminishing fish populations, namely steelhead, and saltwater intrusion, we may see the day where fresh water is not in enough supply. To live, fresh water is necessary. During the next hour, problems and solutions will be described so that we can come together to restore what we can. There are obvious benefits of preserving the water supply, but how and when it gets done are other questions that will affect us all. Ultimately, it's up to us and future generations to preserve the Carmel and Salinas rivers, our water. Let's take an adventure through these amazing places and discover these worlds together.
Monterey County is neither an importer nor an exporter of water. And what that means is that virtually all of the water resources that are relied upon by both residents and business in Monterey County come from sources that are within Monterey County. And it's that overdraft in both of those basins that collectively are the two biggest problems that the county faces.
Well, I think there's three main problems or issues that we're facing at this point in the Salinas Valley. The first being the saltwater intrusion problem that we've actually had for many decades now. The second is possible flooding along the Salinas River, that the river channel itself at this point is not very well maintained, and that there's concern that any rain flow that may be coming down the river in the coming winter months, hopefully we get rain, will cause some flooding in areas. And hopefully not as bad as 95, but we can't predict how that's going to work out based on the channel condition at this point. And the third is the groundwater situation, and being in a drought year, what the impacts are of groundwater pumping and how that will overall affect the groundwater basin itself, as well as the saltwater intrusion problem.
Well, I think the most crucial problems regarding water here in coastal California is water quantity right now, since we're in a drought, and water quality.
The concern is finding a balance of using water for both cities and homes, as well as being able to use it for agriculture, and finding ways that everyone can use that water more efficiently.
Crucial problems really relate to water supply and the quality of that supply. That can be seawater intrusion, nitrate issues, as well as just having enough water for both agriculture and urban needs. The biggest part of the solution to any of that, though, is funding. And that is a real, may not be a water problem, but it is a problem for the solution to those water problems, is trying to gain funding to make those solutions appear.
Well, there's two things that I kind of dwell on, and one, and it's about the fact that we are using up our water. We're using too much. We're wasting it. And what I mean by that is, first of all, no person has the right to use the water and then discard it in a way that can't be used by anybody else. So in other words, we have this waste stream of water that is really polluted, and we've got to minimize that waste stream.
Well, there's two big issues initially. Agriculture in the Salinas Valley is threatened by the intrusion of seawater as wells are tapped for groundwater. Seawater has moved up the valley to replace the underground water that's been depleted. This has been known since the 1940s and 50s. A lot of work has been done on it. Some progress has been made through a variety of projects, but much more water is needed to prevent damage to the agricultural industry and economy by fighting seawater intrusion.
Hi, my name is Vashti Rosa, and I'm a student at Millennium Charter High School, and we're here at the Carmel River. And just a fun fact, without this river, you're dead.
My name is Brittany Carell. I'm a sophomore at Millennium Charter High School, and I have one useful tip that can help you conserve water. If you use a low-flow shower head, you can save up to 15 gallons of water in one 10-minute shower.
Overall, the Carmel River cannot provide the amount needed, especially in drought times. Overpumping a watershed means that salt water will intrude into the water supply, making it no longer fresh water. You can see this happening in Castroville, where they have capitalized on this problem by choosing to grow salt-resistant plants like artichokes. With the Salinas River, used mostly by private landowners and those in agriculture, there are problems with drought, pollution, and water rights. In addition, state lawmakers passed a bill to regulate waters from wells on private land. Here in Monterey County, it's clear we have a lot of water problems, and it's a serious issue we all face.
Hi, I'm Carolina Pantoja. I'm from Millennium Charter High School, and I'm a junior. And did you know it takes 55 gallons of water to make 1 cup of coffee? And that just goes to watering the bean alone.
Did you know that the Carmel River is one of the most endangered rivers in all of North America?
The Salinas River is 170 miles long and is considered the longest underground river in the United States, which is why it is nicknamed the Upside Down River. The other odd thing about this river is that it flows north, while most rivers actually flow east or west. So the river that flows through the Salinas Valley is called the Lower Salinas River. It sits between the Santa Lucia, Sierra de Salinas mountain ranges and the Gabilan Range and Shalom Hills. Settlers started coming through in the 1860s, setting up ranches and towns. At that time, grain was the biggest crop in the 19th century. Then in 1895, a drought came along and irrigation began its popularity. By 1901, 70 claims for water from the Salinas River were filed, but the Salinas bounced back. And in 1914, the King City Rustler reported, the Salinas River swelled to great depths and widths by storms of the past 2 weeks, has washed out bridges in both Soledad and King City. After World War I, dry farming made the way to irrigated row crops, which is the main agricultural business we still have today.
Did you know every year the Carmel River dries up, but prior to 1949 that never used to happen?
Well, the issues with the Salinas River are really much as they were 60 years ago, believe it or not. That the seawater intrusion, and seawater intrusion was first discovered in the Salinas River Basin about in the 1937, and then the state did a study in the late 40s. Infamous Bulletin 52 kind of laid out what needed to be done in order to stop seawater intrusion. And it's been, 70 years, 80 years, we're still fighting seawater intrusion. And a plan to solve the seawater intrusion problems within the basin was identified by the state in the late 40s. And we still haven't fully implemented that plan. And because we haven't, for a number of reasons, but because we haven't, we still have seawater intrusion. Then in 1994, the state board came down and told the Salinas Valley they needed to basically get their act together, or they were going to let the 800-pound gorilla out of the closet and come down and essentially do an adjudication and force everyone to get together. There was we have built projects. We've built 4 projects and probably spent over $400 million in today's dollars. The first was the Nacimiento Reservoir, and then the second was the San Antonio Reservoir, because the first wasn't enough, so they did the second. And then it was several years. That was in I think the San Antonio was mid-60s. And so then it was several years until the early 90s that we looked at utilizing recycled water.
Additionally, in the Salinas Valley, the basin has been identified as being an overdrafted percolated groundwater basin since 1946. A number of very aggressive projects have been initiated by farmers and landowners in the Salinas Valley since the late 1950s. But even with the development of those additional water resources, the basin is still in overdraft.
The Carmel is a lovely little river. It isn't very long, but in its course it has everything a river should have. The Carmel River was once full to capacity with lush vegetation and creatures: steelhead, watercress, water skippers, minnows, and ducks, the red fox, the blue heron. The sediment buildup and humans moving in have played parts in moving the river towards the issues it has today. The Carmel River has 2 dams, but with lots of sediment buildup, the San Clemente Dam was once in danger of collapsing, but is now being torn down to save the river. The dam itself was at 10% of its capacity in 2002 from when it was built in 1921.
The Carmel River watershed is one of 2 sources for over 600,000 people's water. However, both sources are being overpumped.
Obviously, the drought seems to have been on people's minds for a while now. But with or without it, people do have concerns about the water supply.
The county utilizes groundwater for 95% of the water that it uses. In the Salinas Valley, 90% of the water utilized is for agriculture, and 10% is for urban, and that's just from the groundwater basin. Like I say, most of the water used is groundwater. So that's an important thing to protect. Now for habitats, we also have some endangered species here, endangered or threatened, and depending on the species.
We control the river so heavily. So that's certainly one issue. Pollution is another issue. They come from a lot of different sources. Fertilizers, chemicals, sediment. There are a number of different sources of pollutants that get into the river. And of course, to have a healthy watershed, you have to have clean water. And so that's very critical.
There's a lot of focus on the Salinas River itself. A lot of environmental groups want to maintain that as a natural river with vegetation and habitat. The problem with that is that the river is dry normally 9 months of the year, and it's only enhanced to have water year-round because of the projects that we built. So it's a highly modified system at this point, and a lot of the environmentalists don't realize that it's not a pristine environment, that we need to deal with what we have here and not necessarily look at it as a pristine environment. There's also a lot of concern about the use of chemicals and pesticides and crop protection tools in the county and statewide. And there's a lot of groups that are moving forward and trying to eliminate the use of pesticides by 2020. That's not really a realistic situation for our concerns with the production of agriculture and the crops that we grow here, as well as around the state. We need some of those chemicals to keep our crops up to the point of the yields that people expect when they go to the supermarkets.
No one has the right to use up the water. It has to be left in a way that can be reused, and we're not doing that. And then the second thing is we need to use, so this is related, we need to use that wastewater instead of going out and searching for new water. And so if we were to find ways to treat that wastewater stream, it actually turns out that the volume of wastewater that is being produced by the Salinas Valley and the Monterey Peninsula is enough to solve the peninsula's water needs, the Carmel River issue, and leave enough water, more than enough water, for agriculture of the uses that they can conceive of. So the waste stream is that great that it would solve all the problems. But the issue is that it actually costs more to treat that water than to go out looking for new water, either bore into the ground and pull out groundwater, or even to desalinate water. So we've got to work on that wastewater stream. We've got to reduce it, and what is left, we've got to clean it up and reuse it. And the reality is that we're creating such a huge waste stream of water that it would actually solve the water needs of the peninsula and of agriculture in the Salinas Valley if we were just reusing the wastewater. So there is this incredible linkage between water supply and water quality, and we have to understand that linkage, and we have to reuse that wastewater stream. So those are kind of the four interests that need to be involved. It needs to be the peninsula, it needs to be the pollution control agency, it needs to be the water agency that serves the growers, and then the growers have to buy in somehow. So that's who has to be involved, and frankly, there is kind of a water war between the peninsula and the Salinas Valley. And so getting those people to sit down together and agree to anything is difficult.
Did you know it takes 155 gallons of water to wash your car? Don't wash your car, just wash the windows.
Did you know that Monterey County doesn't import any of our water, so we rely solely on our precipitation in our watersheds?
Here in the Monterey Peninsula, we get most of our water from the Carmel River. And most of that water is unpermitted water, and therefore is technically illegal for the water company, Cal-Am, to be pumping. And the state has said Cal-Am has until January 1st, 2017 to stop that illegal pumping, which means that we need a new replacement supply for that water by 2017 unless we can get an extension to the state's deadline. And we are in active discussions with the state about modifying that deadline, but at this point, the deadline is January 1st, 2017. This community has done a very good job at water conservation, and we're down to using between 50 and 60 gallons a person a day, which is right at the bottom of any community in the state. And there's not all that much more water conservation that we can have.
The issue with being a coastal community is your sources are basically limited. And I mentioned this earlier, you can go to the rivers, you can go to the groundwater, you can go to the ocean, or you can go to recycling. And that's pretty much it. So we are looking at pretty much all of those, but we've got limited choices with respect to the river. The river will always be part of our supply. The Carmel Valley alluvial aquifer will still produce approximately 1/5 of all the water for consumption here. But the new sources are primarily desalination and water recycling, and we're going at them pretty strong. The cease and desist order on the peninsula has an effective date of January 1, 2017. There will not be any new water supply in place by then. So the real work that has to happen between now and, let's say, a year from now is working with the state regulators to extend that cease and desist order, because the business community here can't absorb a regulatory rationing regime that cuts us back to 1/3 of the water supply. So the desal plant will get built at some point. Water recycling hopefully will get built at some point, but none of them will get built by 2017.
Well, solutions to our water problems, a lot of the solutions are political, and they go back 100 years onto water rights, and we've got ours, and we're not going to share it with others.
Water rights is dependent on who owns the land. The history of the first major water company pumping from the Carmel River takes us back to 1883, when the first known dam on the Carmel River was created a half a mile below the site of the current San Clemente Dam. The Pacific Improvement Company had the dam built by 700 Chinese laborers in order to provide water to their new Del Monte Hotel in nearby Monterey. Here is the language of the original 1948 permit for water from the Carmel River. Basically, Cal-Am took over the water rights in 1985 for a portion of the water from the river, but it has proven to overpump past the allowance of their permit.
A lot of people will talk about water rights. The fact of the matter is there are far more water rights on paper than actually manifest themselves in terms of actual wet water. And that's perhaps singularly the most important problem that the state of California faces. There has not been a comprehensive effort to eliminate the false paper water rights that exist within the context of the records of the State Water Resources Control Board, and perhaps more importantly, the California Department of Water Resources, because there is inadequate water to sustain both the public trust resources that exist in the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta and to satisfy the demand both of existing consumptive water rights users, whether they be urban areas or agriculture, but also the expectations of people who are relying on paper water for future projects. And the fact of the matter is, in many cases, that future water doesn't exist. And so when those future projects are approved by elected officials on a local level or on a countywide level, they're predicated upon the falsehood that somehow there's a water supply available. That's the biggest problem that exists in Monterey County as well. With 2 overdrafted basins constituting more than 95% of the available water supply for all purposes within Monterey County, it's realistic to assume that short of comprehensive water development projects, there's no more water left. And the truth of the circumstances are that there is no groundwater left in Monterey County that does not belong to somebody. The Carmel River is a sad situation. Truly, it is a sad situation. The State Water Resources Control Board issued an order in 1995 that ordered the California American Water Company to fix the problem. It essentially said, stop stealing water out of the Carmel River, because you're stealing water out of the Carmel River. Develop a new project, whether it was a new dam or something else, develop a new project to offset your illegal diversion of water out of the Carmel River. In 1995, Southern Steelhead was not listed as threatened. In 1995, the red-legged frog was not listed as threatened. Cal-Am's done nothing in 20 years. Nothing in 20 years. It is an abomination that a junior appropriator has been allowed to perpetuate illegal diversions out of an aquifer in like the Carmel Valley for 2 decades. It is a flaunting of the law. And the fact that we now have both southern steelhead listed as threatened species, that we have red-legged frog listed as under the Endangered Species Act, that we have multiple other species that are indigenous to that waterway listed under either the state or federal Endangered Species Act, is indicative of the problem that exists in Monterey County. The fact that the Board of Supervisors has allowed that to be perpetuated is frankly an indication of their lack of concern for something they should be very concerned about. The fact that the mayors of the municipalities on the Monterey Peninsula have not stood up over 20 years and demanded that Cal-Am fix the environmental problem that Cal-Am has created is tragic, truly tragic. And there is no excuse after 20 years for that problem not to have been fixed. There is no excuse except it's cheaper for Cal-Am to continue to pump water out of the ground and sell it to the ratepayers for about $4,000 an acre foot than it is for them to have to go and build a new project to mitigate their environmental damage. Major new developments are going to have to bring with them a new water supply or they should not be approved.
So what if Cal-Am wasn't running things? That possibility has already been voted down. Cal-Am is a retail water service, a business, and it would have gone to a public service, the water management district owned by the people, like most of the rest of California if Measure O had passed.
We would have been charged with the implementation of Measure O. So it didn't pass, so this is all hypothetical, but it would have basically put us in the position of taking over the operations of the retail utility here on the peninsula. Meaning we probably would have hired about 2/3 of the Cal-Am staff, built up an operating unit, and implemented rate setting, billing, customer service, all of the features of a regular operating utility. But it would have been seamless for the customers. They would have one month seen a Cal-Am bill and the next month seen a Monterey Peninsula Water Management District bill. There would have been some simplification in rate setting, a little bit more transparency, probably more public participation in what goes on, but generally speaking, it wouldn't have been any different than, the couple hundred water agencies up and down the state of California.
Even more tragically, the people who are either elected or appointed to be responsible for their management have little, if any, expertise in the area of implementing effectively the requirements of California groundwater rights law. And that's institutional ignorance is perhaps singularly the biggest impediment to an effective groundwater management plan that exists not only here in Monterey County but throughout the state of California.
Water is very complex. It has its own boundaries and own limits, and as much as we like to be able to control water, it has a mind of its own.
In times of drought, when the visible water is going away, we still get water from below the surface, from the groundwater. The groundwater in an area is part of the watershed. The watershed encompasses all of the water in an area, the streams, the ponds, the river itself, and all of the water close by. Keeping the watershed clean is a major problem with very few realistic foolproof solutions, especially to protect wildlife.
We realized that there were three basic issues: habitat, they need lots of habitat; oil, they can't get oil on them; and then they also need really quality, high quality water to live in. And that's what got us into the water quality issues. And when we started looking at the water quality issues, we realized that two things were happening with otters. One was they have high levels of DDT, which is a legacy pesticide, and so on the farm practices could help that. But then the big issue that we just learned about in the past 8 years or so is the fact that otters are dying from toxic algal blooms. So nutrients produced up on land, used for farming and other purposes, then wash into the water, both freshwater and saltwater, cause toxic algal blooms. The toxins are then concentrated by the things otters eat, And so then the otter eats the poison pill and dies. And so literally scores of otters are dying of pollution, and the pollution is coming from excess nutrients washing into the ocean.
And then water quality, what is being flushed to the bay, and so that we have a lot of runoff coming off of fields in the Salinas Valley, and that's following channels and everything going into the Monterey Bay. And not only is that fresh water that could be reused, but it's also fresh water carrying a lot of contaminants.
The most recent Groundwater Sustainability Act that was the governor signed 3 bills just on September 16th, and that basically allows the establishment of an agency to control or monitor or develop sustainability plans for groundwater. This is the first time that groundwater has been managed in California.
To have and to sustain that type of economic growth that we all now recognize as Silicon Valley. It's equally true here in Monterey County. You can't have a vibrant agricultural industry in Monterey County without a sustainable water supply. And you cannot have a farmer having to go hand to hand to a regulator saying, please, can I have enough water to irrigate my broccoli? Because they'll just move to Mexico. That's what will happen. People will vote with their feet and leave. And so it is incumbent upon elected officials, both those that are responsible for water in a regulatory and development standpoint, but also those that are responsible for land use decisions, whether it be in the county or in municipalities, to recognize the necessity of developing not only a comprehensive water program, but a real development of water resources program.
Yes, there's highly regulated situations for all the farms along the Central Coast at this point, and farmers are scrambling to figure out how they can do this and still manage to be financially viable each year, because each time these sets of regulations are put in place, they cost more money, there's more monitoring, there's more reporting, there's more time required by the farmer being in the office, working on a computer, reporting something rather than being out in the field growing his crops. So that directly impacts the financial viability of a lot of the smaller farms in particular, because they just don't have the resources to do all this extra work. So it's a challenge on a regular basis to manage the irrigated lands program as it's currently set up in the Central Coast. And I think a lot of farmers are now figuring out how best they can do that. But I think particularly for the small farms, it's really a big impact, and it will dramatically change how they operate their farms in the future.
In a drought year or several years of drought years, it becomes a concern that we don't have enough groundwater recharge. And on the coastal areas, there's concern about saltwater intrusion into those groundwater resources. So strawberry farmers many years ago adopted drip irrigation as a way to efficiently use their water and to efficiently use their irrigation resources.
Water is a resource much like any other, except it's more important. We need money, land, and people. But more than that, we need water to survive at all. It grows the food we need to eat, the water we need to be clean, and the nourishment our bodies need to stay alive.
The California red-legged frog is a threatened species in the Carmel River due to habitat loss and the dam.
Do you know the consequences of not having any water? You're gonna have to move.
In order to have a healthy river, you need to have everything working in sync. The man needs to understand our relationship with the river in order to be better for the river.
So, I think not knowing very much about the biological aspects of this biological place is a big risk for us. If you want to support agriculture, you have to know how that agriculture impacts the wild spaces around it. I mean, the Salinas River is the #1 source of water for this whole agricultural region. Not knowing enough about it to make sure that it maintains healthy water flows, healthy populations of animals is a big risk for us. So I think getting access to that information, getting access to that place, understanding it better is a a big job because there's just not a lot of information out there, but it's also a really important step that we could take to help out our whole county.
You know, one interesting contrast between the Carmel River and the Salinas River is that the Salinas River, with the exception of the 2 dams and a few other dams that have been put in the lower river, it's not a river that's been managed at all. I mean, you can't even really say that it's been mismanaged because it's just not even being managed. It's sort of been left to its own devices largely. The relationship that most people have with it in the farm community is one of we're going to use the water that this watershed provides, and we fear the river, flooding, and so we want to shore up as much as we can the riverbanks. The only thing they care about is preventing floods and taking whatever water from it, and everything else is not a concern, And so that's kind of what we were able to see firsthand. I mean, there are places where you're walking in different parts of the river where you see old wrecked cars, smashed along the riverbanks, and you see just giant fences and all this construction debris, along the shores, and it's completely transformed into the from the wilderness that it once was into this sort of surreal landscape that's it's still somewhat wild, but it's also not wild, and so I think that's how the river is going to be changing in the future, is that I think that the wildness is going to start coming back. The Nature Conservancy has just gone into a partnership with some farmers to remove some arundo. They haven't been removing any vegetation in that river for almost a decade. And so you have all these invasive species coming in there that are just ruining all the wildlife, and now it's bad for farmers. So anyways, there is some changes now, and I think that in the future there's going to be more of an eye at managing the river in strategic ways, and not just to stop it from flooding and not just to serve the farmers. It's a resource that's really bigger than that.
The real problem that's existed for a long time in the Salinas Valley is there is a denial on the part of environmental groups that any kind of channel maintenance is necessary. There's a denial on the part of many agriculturalists that any kind of environmental protection is necessary. And so given the denial of the truth by both parties, we've achieved nothing. And the fact that we've had a drought for 2 or 3 years is a really bad thing, except for one thing, and that's we haven't had a flood. In the event that it rains again, and I can assure you sooner or later it will, because the Salinas Valley is notorious for going from very, very wet periods to very, very dry periods. When the next wet period manifests itself, I think the potential for massive flooding, like what was experienced in '95 and 1998, even to a greater degree, is very possible.
Yes, there's a concern from the environmental groups and what we do here, and we're trying to be good stewards of the land and manage it as best we can. After all, the resources are things that we need to use over and over each year in order to produce the crops that we grow.
After learning about all of the issues with water that people around Monterey County are experiencing, students at Millennium Charter High School decided it was time to take a look for themselves at the problems the Carmel River is having. So they went on a 12-mile trek into the wilderness to find a dwindling river. Yet they still found unique beauty, living things, and had the experience to connect with nature in this rare opportunity. Spending about 10 hours out in the wilderness in the Carmel Valley, these students wanted to make sure that this problem gets solved.
For this trek, I filled up this water jug with water from home. And where did this water come from? Right here. The students at Millennium Charter High School are trying to raise awareness about these conditions.
I'm Mrs. Conway, and I'm here with Millennium Charter High School students. We're out here at the Carmel River, and today we're talking about 2 threatened species that live in the Carmel River watershed. Those 2 species are the California red-legged frog and steelhead trout. So the Carmel River watershed right now is experiencing the drought that all of Monterey County is, and it is a crucial habitat for both the steelhead trout and the California red-legged frog that are threatened species right now.
You need to create a process, and it's going to take you a little while because it's not something that you just do in a couple of months. It took us, with planning and studies and all that, I think it took us about 3 years to prepare and go through the process of finalizing the Upper Salinas River Watershed Action Plan. As the cities get bigger, they use more water. As farms grow or more of them occur, then they use more water. So what you have to do is get everybody together. If you want good water solutions, you have to have all of the people together on the solutions. And we have to understand that there's going to be drought periods, and there's going to be periods where there's too much water.
I think there needs to be overall planning about the future needs for both the community and for agriculture in the area, and then taking a look at what those needs might be, and then doing an analysis of the best resources. What's easy to adopt right now is a lot of conservation measures. The Strawberry Commission has been working with local scientists as well as with the growers to help them find ways to make their drip irrigation even more efficient.
Government makes the rules with or without us. They're going to. And if you can be part of the process, and I think we can learn from each other. I think government can learn from us and we can learn from them too. But it needs to be a shared process. And I think that as the community moves forward and continues to work together, I think we will resolve those things. And then let's move forward again. It's the next project we built was the Salinas Valley Water Project. And that was actually the vote was in 2003. I don't think it was constructed. It was finally finished in 2010, I think was the first full year of use. And that was seen as the project that would finally resolve the seawater intrusion, balance the basins. Not sure that it has. This is still, it's our indicators. Again, it's only been 4 years. We've had 2 years of a drought. This last year has been worst drought on record. So we're actually looking at the next project, and probably the mistake we made as a community was not starting on that next project as soon as we had the vote on the Salinas Valley Water Project. You need to look forward.
The fact is, the only real solution that exists, both for the shortages that exist in the Carmel Valley and the shortages that exist in the Salinas Valley, is the development of a comprehensive seawater desalination project. And in conjunction with that, a comprehensive groundwater recharge program where the excess pumping in the various groundwater basins is offset by the storage of additional supply.
We have a number of different things we're looking at. I think one of the projects at this point that is gaining a lot of momentum and also support throughout the agricultural community here, as well as the municipalities, is what's called the Interlake Connection or Tunnel Project, where we will connect Lake Nacimiento with Lake San Antonio and allow flows that go into Nacimiento to go downhill gradient into San Antonio. Since San Antonio fills a lot slower than the other lake, this is a way to store additional water for releases during the dry months of the year. So that project probably has the better chance at this point of advancing. We just need to find funding and then go through the whole entire CEQA process to determine what that project is, how it can be built, how it can be engineered.
Solutions to our water problems include dealing with political challenges facing all of our communities, and that includes transferring water from one basin to another. I think if our lawmakers and staff people can really come to some agreement on that, I think we can probably solve the water quantity issues on the Monterey Peninsula and a lot of water quality issues in the Salinas River. We need to have metered wells for people in rural areas, and so that they can can be held accountable for water that they're using. And the same thing for agriculture. Agriculture is working on becoming very conserving, and I know many of the vintners have little sensors right there on the plant. It's important in the Salinas as well that we have plants, native plants up on the hillsides, conducting water down into the aquifers, which in turn will keep the rivers flowing and keep the groundwater recharged.
The one thing that I would say is that the Salinas Valley and the agricultural community here wants to be good neighbors to everyone, and that includes what's going on in the peninsula at this point with their ongoing search for replacement water from the Carmel River and finding that municipal water that supplies 100,000 people roughly on the peninsula. We've been very supportive as a community here in the Salinas Valley to help them find a project that will do that, and are very much participating in the Cal-Am project, the proposed desalination plant, and trying to find a solution and work within the community and the confines that we have as far as groundwater basin and extraction of water for source water on the desal plant. There's also 2 competing desal proposals that are working through the process also. So we actually have 3 projects that we're watching and monitoring to help determine whether or not some of that water ultimately can be available for agriculture also.
Well, I think that there are people out there that feel that they have a right to use the water. And people do have the right to use water. It's about polluting the water that's the issue, and in discarding it. People don't have the right to use up the water. In other words, return it to the environment in a way that's so polluted that it can't be reused, or it's difficult or expensive to reuse. If you think of a municipality in the city, we all go to the bathroom and there's a waste stream that comes out of that. Then what happens, it goes into a sewer system and is treated by the municipality, by the city, before it's discharged. So, and we pay for that treatment with our taxes. There are all these other uses that are discarding water that is untreated, and those uses have to become more responsible.
In fact, a few months ago, at our wastewater system, we figured out how to take a $750 bladder, which is a big rubber balloon, stick it in a pipe, reverse the flow of water, and make 4 million gallons a day of water available for recycling, which had never been available before. So that is currently going to Castroville and being used as irrigation. One of the things that we have discovered as Salinas becomes more of a regional partner in the water conversations, and we need to all of us step outside the limits of our boundaries. Water is a system. Water works throughout our county and doesn't follow the jurisdictions that we would like to have it follow. So we need to start having different conversations with both the hospitality industry, the agricultural industry, the cities and the agencies about how we can work together to reach solutions.
The sustainable water supply for the peninsula is really kind of a threefold portfolio. We've talked about desalination, we've talked about water recycling. The third is, and it's a small component, but it's about 20% of the total water supply, and it's called aquifer storage and recovery, or conjunctive use. And the concept there is all of the rivers, both the Carmel River, the Salinas River, flow very heavily in winter months on average, obviously not this past winter that was a drought. So if you can capture winter water and put it in the ground and bring it out when it's needed, then you've in effect created a reservoir without building a dam. And so we have an aquifer storage and recovery program that has proven to be effective in wet years. But the state has limited us to only using that water in the current year. When you put it in, you have to take it out. Once we build a new water supply, the state will allow us to bank that water from year to year to year. And so the goal is to build up a reserve, to build up an actual reservoir storage. And that will become kind of a drought reserve, or a protection mechanism. So that conjunctive use off the Carmel River will allow us to bring anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 acre feet per year which is, an acre-foot's basically a football field covered by a foot of water, enough to serve maybe 4 or 5 average homes for an entire year. So we can bring that water in, put it into the ground, and then start to bank it and build it up over 4, 5, 6 average years. So when we have a drought year like this year, we have that reserve.
In the last couple years, we've had a coming together of pretty disparate interests, all agreeing on a general framework and a general path forward for a portfolio of water projects. We have the Farm Bureau and the Salinas Valley Water Coalition agreeing with the Sierra Club and Land Watch and Surfrider, agreeing with the Business Coalition, agreeing with CalAm, agreeing with the Division of Ratepayer Advocates, agreeing with all of us 6 peninsula mayors, 5 supervisors, everyone, number of community groups, everyone finally getting on the same page and saying, this is the direction we need to head. Yes, there's some details we still have to work out, and those details are important, and often the devil's in the details, but broadly speaking, this is the direction we need to head. And that direction is to have a portfolio of 4 different water projects that in aggregate will add up to the water that we need. Roughly speaking, we need 10,000 acre-feet of water, which is the amount of water that it would take to serve between 30,000 and 40,000 homes. So it's a significant amount of water. It's most of the water that we use here on the peninsula. And we're looking at a moderately sized desal plant. We're looking at a groundwater replenishment, a water recycling plant, taking wastewater and purifying it. We're looking at what we call aquifer storage and recovery, which is taking flows from the Carmel River when the river is really flowing during storm events and pumping that water and storing it in the Seaside Basin for later use during the summer months. And I'll go through and describe each of them in a little bit of detail. And I'll start with the smallest and I'll work my way up to the largest. So the smallest are some small projects in Pacific Grove, where Pacific Grove is looking at no longer irrigating their golf courses with potable water and instead using other water and freeing up that potable drinking water for other uses. So that's one project. That's in the range of a couple hundred acre-feet a year. The Aquifer Storage and Recovery Project is capturing Carmel River flows, and that's in the range of 1,000 acre-feet a year. It's a very low-cost project. It's using the existing infrastructure, but the problem is it's limited by weather. The third project is it's a really exciting project because it's combining solving a problem that Salinas Valley has with solving a problem that the Monterey Peninsula has. Salinas Valley has water quality issues, nitrates, pesticides, and so forth in some of their water. And what we're proposing in partnership with Salinas Valley is to take some of that contaminated water, bring it into the water treatment plant that has some excess capacity anyway, treat that water. That project would help both Salinas Valley address their water quality issues and Monterey Peninsula address its water quantity issues. And we're really excited about what that could bring. That would supply up to 3,500 acre-feet of water per year. And then the final project, the largest in the portfolio, is the desalination project. And that would be in the range of 6,000 acre-feet a year. So in aggregate, it adds up to about the 10,000 acre-feet that we need. What is being proposed is a subsurface intake, which is wells that would go out underneath the Pacific Ocean and pull in, hopefully, all salt water or almost entirely salt water, and then take that up and pump it through filters, a reverse osmosis system. This is technology that's been around for actually quite a long time. So really, this portfolio is at its core, it's an environmental project. It's to get off the Carmel River, and we're trying to do it in an environmentally responsible way. We'll also help to restore the habitat for the steelhead trout, red-legged frogs, and just the ecosystem generally. So I'm really excited about the community finally delivering on new water supply, both because the community needs it and the river needs it.
As you can see, people are coming together to get things done in Monterey County. Everyone seems to have solutions, and there's enough agreement to accomplish the task. We still need more legislators who are water experts, and we still need money and time. But if our experts keep trying, then we will have water for a very long time.
People need to be involved in protecting native and intact habitats, because that in turn is protecting our water sources. People also need to know that they can do something for water by planting native plants in their yards, to having very low water use in their own personal landscaping, but knowing that what they do in their own personal landscaping also affects water that's getting into our groundwater, and that's a real powerful thing that an individual can do, and it starts in our case with native plants, and these are the solutions that have been here in this in our area for tens of thousands of years. And so if you look to nature for your solutions, you're going to be in a good way off into the future.
It makes sense when you remodel a house to put in place higher efficiency appliances, higher efficiency or low flow fixtures. But it doesn't always make economic sense to do that if you're not otherwise remodeling a house. And so it's only after you've had a series of years and decades that we now have most of our housing stock with higher efficiency appliances and lower flow fixtures. There's plenty more that can be done. For example, working on rainwater capture, making sure that we have a reasonable way of permitting that, making sure that we have a reasonable way of permitting gray water, which is to stay water from showers and washing machines and that sort of thing.
We are now looking at how to capture our stormwater runoff. The State Water Resources Board, State Water Quality Control Board, would prefer to have us perk our water down into the ground, so that if we build a new parking lot, they want us to put features in it called low impact development features, where the water would run into exposed dirt with plants in it, and the water would perk down in the ground.
Making sure that people there's a reasonable amount of water used for outdoor irrigation, and if that can be native plants or otherwise plants that are what someone referred to as responsible drinkers, which is plants that don't use as much water as other plants. For example, the garden that we're in right now, we actually have a mix. We have back here, we have some plants that are higher water users, but we've tried to concentrate that, and then most of the garden is native plants and very low water use. So that's the sort of thing that we encourage here in Carmel, and we sort of use this as an example of how you can have some flowering plants, but don't have too many of them, and have most of your garden native plants or other plants that are low water users.
In the end, we have solutions to our water problems. Don't forget to check your pipes for leaks. Monitor and be selective about what you're putting down the sink. And think about what you can do to help your community.
I have spoken of the rich years when the rainfall was plentiful, but there were dry years too, and they put a terror on the valley. The water came in a 30-year cycle. There would be 5 or 6 wet and wonderful years when there might be 19 to 25 inches of rain, and the land would shout with grass. Then would come 6 or 7 pretty good years of 12 to 16 inches of rain, and then the dry years would come. And sometimes there would be only 7 or 8 inches of rain. The land dried up, and the grasses headed out miserably a few inches high, and great, bare, scabby places appeared in the valley. The live oaks got a crusty look, and the sagebrush was gray. The land cracked, and the springs dried up, and the cattle listlessly nibbled dry twigs. Then the farmers and the ranchers would be filled with disgust for the Salinas Valley. The cows would grow thin and sometimes starve to death. People would have to haul water in barrels to their farms just for drinking. Some families would sell out for nearly nothing and move away. And it never failed that during the dry years, the people forgot about the rich years, and during the wet years, they lost all memory of the dry years. It was always that way.